The clock on the nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. Its red digits cutting through the dark like a warning I couldn't heed. I wasn't asleep, not really, but I kept my eyes shut, my breathing slow, as if the world might shatter if I moved. Then I felt it, the lightest brush of fingers against my arm. Tentative, like a question whispered in the dead of night. I'd known Ethan for 3 months, ever since we were paired as roommates at Whitman College, a small liberal arts school tucked in the rolling hills of Washington State. He was the kind of guy who filled a room without trying, blonde curls that caught the light, a laugh that made strangers turn, and a way of looking at you that felt like he saw more than you meant to show. I was the opposite, Noah, the quiet one, dark hair always falling into my eyes, more comfortable with books than people. We'd clicked, though, in that effortless way you don't question, sharing late-night pizza and arguing over music until the world felt smaller, safer. But this touch in the dark was something else. I lay there, heart pounding, pretending to sleep as his fingers lingered, tracing the edge of my wrist. Why didn't I move? Why didn't I say something? Maybe because part of me wanted to know what came next, what this meant for him, for us. The dorm was silent except for the hum of the radiator and the occasional creak of the old building settling. Ethan's bed was 6 feet from mine, close enough that I could hear his uneven breathing, like he was wrestling with something he couldn't name. I kept my eyes closed, my body still, but my mind was a storm. Was this a mistake? A dream? Or was Ethan, the guy who'd become my anchor in this strange new world of college, crossing a line I hadn't even known was there? I'd grown up in a small town outside Seattle, where different was a word you didn't say out loud. My parents were kind but practical, the kind who'd ask about grades before feelings. I'd known I was gay since I was 14, but it was a truth I'd buried under layers of caution, like a secret I could only whisper to myself. College was supposed to be my chance to start over, to figure out who I was without the weight of expectation. Ethan, with his easy charm and open heart, had made that feel possible until now. His touch stopped, and I heard him shift, the mattress creaking as he pulled away. I wanted to open my eyes, to see his face, to know what he was thinking, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I lay there, frozen, as the silence stretched on, heavy with questions neither of us was ready to ask. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window, and Ethan was already up, humming as he made coffee with our cheap dorm room machine. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, tossing me a grin that felt too bright, too normal. I mumbled something back, my voice rough, and avoided his eyes. Had last night happened? Was I imagining the weight of it? I watched him move around the room, his usual self-carefree, confident, and wondered if I'd dreamed the whole thing. We had a routine: breakfast at the dining hall, classes, then back to the dorm for study sessions that always turned into debates about philosophy or bad horror movies. Today, though, every glance felt loaded. When he handed me a mug, his fingers brushed mine, and I flinched, spilling coffee on the desk. "Whoa, you okay?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I nodded, muttering about being tired, but my chest tightened. He didn't know I'd been awake. He didn't know I'd let it happen. That night, I couldn't sleep, waiting for anything to break the tension. I kept replaying his touch, the way it felt both wrong and electric, like a secret I wasn't supposed to want. I wondered if he was lying awake too, staring at the ceiling, or if he'd already forgotten. The uncertainty was worse than anything, a knot in my stomach that grew with every quiet moment. By the end of the week, I was a mess, jumping at every sound, overanalyzing every word he said. Ethan seemed oblivious, but I caught him watching me sometimes, his eyes lingering a second too long. Did he know I knew? Was he waiting for me to say something? I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, But the thought of breaking our fragile balance terrified me. What if I was wrong? What if I ruined everything? I started avoiding him, staying late at the library, skipping our usual movie nights. He noticed. Of course. You're acting weird, Noah, he said one evening, cornering me as I tried to slip out. Did I do something? His voice was soft, almost pleading, and it broke something in me. I wanted to tell him everything, how his touch had unraveled me, how I didn't know what it meant, how I was scared of what I felt. But I just shook my head and left. The words caught in my throat. The truth was, I didn't know how to face Heimer myself. I'd spent so long hiding who I was, pretending to be someone I wasn't, that the idea of being seen, really seen, felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Ethan had touched me, and I'd let him. And now I couldn't pretend I was still asleep, not to him, not to myself. The days blurred into a haze of avoidance and guilt. I'd wake up early, slip out before Ethan stirred, and spend hours wandering campus. My thoughts a tangled mess. Whitman's sprawling lawns and brick buildings felt like a maze I couldn't escape, each corner reminding me of him, of us. I kept replaying that night, dissecting every detail. The way his fingers had hesitated, like he was testing the waters of something forbidden. The way my heart had raced, not with fear, but with something else, something I wasn't ready to name. I'd always thought I knew myself, but now I felt like a stranger, caught between wanting to confront Ethan and wanting to run. One afternoon, I found myself in the campus coffee shop, nursing a cold latte and staring at my laptop screen. I'd meant to study, but instead, I was Googling things like roommate boundaries and what does it mean if someone touches you in your sleep. The internet offered no answers, just endless forums filled with conflicting advice. I slammed my laptop shut, frustrated, when a familiar voice broke through my thoughts. Noah, you look like you're plotting world domination. It was Sarah, my friend from English class, sliding into the seat across from me. She was a junior, sharp-witted and fiercely kind, with a knack for reading people. I forced a smile, but she wasn't fooled. Okay, spill. What's going on? I hesitated. Sarah was the only person I'd told about being gay, back in freshman orientation when we'd bonded over a shared love of poetry. She'd been supportive, no questions asked, but this was different. This was messy, personal, raw. It's complicated, I said finally, staring at my hands. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Complicated how? Is it Ethan? My silence was answer enough. She sighed, softening. Look, I know he's your roommate, and you guys are close, but if something's off, you need to talk to him. Hiding won't fix it. I wanted to tell her about the touch, about my pretending, about the way it had cracked open something inside me. But the words felt too heavy, too dangerous. Instead, I mumbled something about stress and changed the subject. Sarah didn't push, but her knowing look stayed with me long after she left. That night, I couldn't avoid Ethan any longer. He was waiting in the dorm when I got back, sprawled on his bed with a textbook he clearly wasn't reading. You're avoiding me, he said, not looking up. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like he was holding back a storm. I froze, my backpack halfway to the floor. I'm not. I lied, but my voice betrayed me, thin and unconvincing. He sat up, his blue eyes locking onto mine, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Noah, come on. I know you. Something's wrong. Just tell me. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the truth felt like a grenade, and I wasn't ready to pull the pin. I'm just tired, I said, turning away to unpack my bag, my hand shaking. He didn't push, but the silence between us was louder than any words. The next few days were torture. Ethan stopped trying to joke me out of my mood. and I stopped pretending everything was fine. We moved around each other like ghosts, polite but distant, the warmth of our friendship replaced by a cold, unspoken tension. I hated it, but I didn't know how to fix it without breaking everything. Then, one night, it happened again. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I felt the mattress dip. My heart stopped. Ethan was there, sitting on the edge of my bed, his silhouette sharp against the moonlight. "Noah," he whispered, his voice raw. "I need to tell you something." I didn't move, didn't breathe, but I opened my eyes just enough to see him. His face was a map of conflict, fear, guilt, something softer I couldn't name. "I'm sorry," he said, his words barely audible. "For the other night. I didn't mean to. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what I'm doing." My throat tightened. I wanted to sit up, to ask him what he meant, but I was paralyzed, caught between fear and hope. He didn't know I'd been awake that night. He thought he'd crossed a line in secret, and now he was confessing, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him. I stayed silent, letting him think I was asleep, because it was easier than facing the truth. He sat there for a long time, his head bowed, before he finally stood and went back to his bed. I listened to the creak of his mattress, the sound of his breathing settling, and felt a pang of guilt so sharp it hurt. I'd let him bare his soul, and I'd done nothing but pretend. The next morning, I woke to find a note on my desk, written in Ethan's messy scrawl, "We need to talk. Please." My stomach dropped. There was no running from this anymore. I knew I had to face him, to say something, but the thought of it made me feel like I was drowning. What did I want? What did he want? And why did the truth feel like the most dangerous thing in the world? The note burned a hole in my pocket all day. I carried it with me to classes, feeling its weight through the fabric of my jeans, a constant reminder of the conversation I was avoiding. Ethan's words, "We need to talk. Please," looped in my mind, each syllable heavy with meaning I wasn't ready to unpack. I skipped my afternoon lecture and ended up at the edge of campus, where the woods met the soccer fields. The air was crisp, the leaves a riot of red and gold, and I sat on a bench, staring at nothing. I pulled out the note, smoothing it against my knee. His handwriting was messy but deliberate, like he'd written it in a rush but meant every word. I wondered what he'd say if I gave him the chance. Would he confess something I wasn't ready to hear? Would I? By the time I got back to the dorm, the sun was setting, painting the room in shades of orange. Ethan was there, sitting at his desk, his laptop open but untouched. He looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Noah," he said finally, his voice low. "Can we talk now?" I nodded, my throat tight, and sat on my bed, facing him. My hands were clammy, my heart racing, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. They were searching, vulnerable, and it hit me how much I'd dismissed him. "I'm sorry," he started, his words careful. "For the other night. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I was confused. And I shouldn't have," he stopped, his jaw tightening. "I don't know how to say this." My stomach twisted. I wanted to tell him I'd been awake, that I'd felt his touch and let it happen, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, "It's okay. I just need some time." It was a cop-out, and we both knew it. He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "I don't want to lose you, Noah. You're important to me." The words hung between us, raw and unguarded, and I felt a rush of something I couldn't name: fear, hope, longing. "I don't want to lose you either," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the most honest thing I'd said in days, and it felt like a confession of its own. For the next week, We tiptoed around each other, trying to rebuild what we'd had. We went back to our routines: coffee in the morning, study sessions at night, but there was a new undercurrent, a quiet awareness that hadn't been there before. I caught myself watching him, noticing the way his hands moved when he talked, the way his smile faltered when he thought I wasn't looking. And I knew he was watching me too. One night, we ended up at a campus party, dragged along by Sarah and her friends. The music was loud, the room crowded with bodies and laughter. But I felt out of place, sipping a warm beer and watching Ethan from across the room. He was in his element, charming everyone with his easy grin. But his eyes kept finding mine, like he was checking to make sure I was still there. Later, we walked back to the dorm together, the campus quiet under a blanket of stars. "You didn't seem into it tonight," he said, his shoulder brushing mine as we walked. I shrugged. Not my scene. The truth was, I'd been too busy watching him, trying to decipher what was real and what I'd imagined. He stopped walking, turning to face me. "Noah, I need you to be honest with me. Are we okay?" I looked at him, his face lit by the soft glow of a street lamp, and felt the weight of everything I hadn't said. "I don't know," I admitted. "I want us to be, but I don't know what's happening." He stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold air. "I'm trying to figure it out too," he said, "but I can't do it alone." My heart pounded, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. The thought was thrilling and terrifying, and I didn't know if I wanted to lean in or run. Instead, I nodded, and we kept walking, the silence between us filled with possibilities we weren't ready to face. Back in the dorm, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the boy I'd been back home, hiding who I was, and the boy I wanted to be here, brave enough to live his truth. Ethan was part of that, whether I wanted him to be or not. And I knew, deep down, that pretending wasn't enough anymore. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of almosts. Ethan and I were careful with each other, like we were handling something fragile that might break if we moved too fast. But the tension was always there, simmering beneath every glance, every accidental touch. I started opening up to Sarah, telling her pieces of the story, not everything, but enough. She listened, her eyes sharp but kind, and told me I needed to stop running from myself. "You're allowed to feel what you feel, Noah," she said one afternoon over coffee. "But you can't keep pretending it's not there. It's not fair to you or to him." Her words stuck with me, but they didn't make it easier. I was still afraid of what it meant to want Ethan, afraid of what it would cost to admit it. Growing up, I'd learned to keep my feelings locked away, to make myself small enough to fit into a world that didn't always feel safe. College was supposed to change that, but old habits were hard to break. One evening, Ethan suggested we go to an open mic night at a local bar. I agreed, desperate for a distraction. The place was packed, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the hum of conversation. Ethan signed us up to perform a duetted cheesy acoustic cover of a 90s song we both loved. I protested, but his grin was infectious, and soon we were on stage, fumbling through the chords and laughing when we missed a note. For those few minutes, it felt like the old us, before the night that changed everything. But when the song ended and the crowd cheered, Ethan grabbed my hand, pulling me into a quick, impulsive hug. His warmth lingered, and I felt my resolve waver. I wanted to hold on, to let myself fall into whatever this was, but fear pulled me back. Later, as we walked home, Ethan was quieter than usual. "You're good up there," he said finally, his voice soft. "You should let people see you more." I didn't know how to respond. He wasn't just talking about the performance, and we both knew it. When we got back to the dorm, he paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "Noah, I don't know what's going on with us, but I'm not going anywhere." Okay. I nodded, my throat tight. Okay. That night, I dreamed of him, his hand on my wrist, his breath warm against my skin. When I woke, the room was dark, and Ethan was asleep, his breathing steady. I watched him for a moment, wondering what it would be like to cross the space between us, to be brave enough to ask for what I wanted. The next day, I found myself in the campus counseling center, sitting across from a therapist named Dr. Ellis. She was older, with kind eyes and a voice that made you feel safe. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough about Ethan, about the touch, about my fear of what it meant. She listened, nodding, and then said something that stayed with me. Sometimes, the scariest thing isn't the truth, it's what we do with it. I left her office feeling lighter, but no less confused. I wanted to talk to Ethan, to tell him I'd been awake that night. But every time I tried, the words slipped away. Instead, I threw myself into schoolwork, hoping the distraction would dull the ache in my chest. But Ethan wasn't letting me hide. One night, he came back from a study group, his face flushed from the cold. "We're going out," he announced, tossing me my jacket. No arguments. He took me to a diner off campus, a retro place with neon signs and sticky booths. We ordered milkshakes and fries, and for a while, it felt like nothing had changed. But then he leaned across the table, his eyes serious. "Noah, I know I messed up. I shouldn't have done what I did. But I need you to know it wasn't just nothing. It was real." My heart stopped. He was talking about that night, and he was looking at me like I held all the answers. I opened my mouth to speak, to finally tell him the truth, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached for his hand, my fingers brushing his, and for a moment, we just sat there, the world falling away. That moment in the diner changed everything. My hand on Ethan's, the warmth of his skin against my night, was a bridge I couldn't uncross. We didn't talk about it. Not then. But the air between us shifted, charged with something new and unspoken. Back in the dorm, we were quieter, more careful, but the distance we'd built was crumbling. I caught him watching me as I studied, his eyes soft and searching, and I let myself look back. It was terrifying, letting myself want him, but it was also exhilarating, like stepping into a story I'd been too afraid to write. One night, we stayed up late, sprawled on the floor with a pizza box between us, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in Chicago, about his parents' divorce, about the pressure to be the perfect son. I told him about my small town, about the weight of silence, about the boy I'd been too scared to be. It was the most honest we'd ever been, and when our hands brushed, neither of us pulled away. "I like this," he said, his voice low. "Just being with you." My heart raced. "Me too," I said, and it felt like a confession. The next day, I went back to Dr. Ellis, needing to make sense of the hope blooming in my chest. "What if I'm wrong about him?" I asked. "What if I ruin everything?" She smiled, her eyes gentle. "What if you don't? What if this is the start of something real?" Her words followed me back to the dorm, where Ethan was waiting, his laptop open to a movie we'd promised to watch. We sat on his bed, closer than we needed to be, and when the credits rolled, he turned to me. "Noah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I kiss you?" Time stopped. I nodded, my heart in my throat, and then his lips were on mine, soft and tentative, like he was asking a question he wasn't sure I'd answer. I kissed him back, my hands finding his shoulders, and it felt like coming home. We didn't talk much after that, just lay there, tangled together, the world outside our dorm fading away. It wasn't perfect, there was still so much we needed to figure out, but it was real, and that was enough. The next morning, I woke up in his arms, his breath warm against my neck. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was pretending. But the fear wasn't gone. I knew we'd have to face the world eventually, our friends, our families, the campus that felt both safe and suffocating. And I knew I had to tell him the truth, that I'd been awake that night, that I'd let him touch me because I wanted it too. I waited until we were having coffee, the dorm quiet around us. "Ethan," I said, my voice shaking, "there's something I need to tell you. That night, when you touched me, I wasn't asleep." He froze, his mug halfway to his lips. "What?" "I was awake," I said, forcing myself to meet his eyes. I pretended I wasn't because I didn't know what to do. I was scared, but I wanted it. His face was unreadable for a moment, and I braced myself for anger, for rejection. But then he reached for my hand, his grip steady. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I was afraid," I admitted. Of what it meant. Of what I felt. He nodded, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "I was afraid too. But I'm not anymore." Those words broke something open in me, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. We talked for hours, untangling the mess of fear and hope that had brought us here. It wasn't easy, there were still questions, still doubts, but it was honest. And that was a start. Being with Ethan was like learning a new language, one I'd always known but never dared to speak. We were careful at first, keeping our relationship quiet, not because we were ashamed, but because it felt too precious to share. Stolen kisses in the dorm, late-night talks that stretched until dawn. It was a world we'd built just for us. But the outside world wasn't so easy to ignore. Sarah was the first to notice, her eyes lighting up when she saw us together at the coffee shop, our hands brushing under the table. "About time," she said with a grin, and I felt a rush of relief. She didn't judge, didn't pry, just pulled us into a group hug that made Ethan laugh and me blush. Not everyone was as accepting. One night, we ran into a group of guys from Ethan's econ class at a campus bar. They were loud, drunk, and when one of them saw us sitting close, he made a crude joke that made my stomach turn. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down, his hand finding mine under the table. "Ignore them," he whispered, but the words lingered, a reminder of the world we'd have to face. We started talking about what we were, what this meant. Ethan was braver than I was, more willing to call it what it was, love. "I've never felt this way about anyone," he told me one night, his voice soft as we lay in my bed, the moonlight spilling across the floor. "I don't care what anyone thinks." I wanted to be that brave, but fear was a stubborn shadow. I thought about my parents, about the small town I'd left behind, about the whispers that had followed me even before I'd come out. Ethan's family was different, divorced, but open-minded, the kind who'd welcome him no matter who he loved. Mine, I wasn't so sure. One weekend, we drove to Seattle, just the two of us, to escape the campus bubble. We walked along the waterfront, holding hands when no one was looking, and for a moment, I felt free. But then my phone buzzed with a text from my mom, asking when I was coming home for break. The thought of facing her, of telling her about Ethan, made my chest tight. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his hand warm against mine. I showed him the text, my voice barely steady. "I don't know how to tell them. About us." He squeezed my hand. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll be there, if you want." His offer was a lifeline, but it didn't erase the fear. I nodded, leaning into him, and we watched the waves crash against the shore, the future looming like a storm on the horizon. Back at Whitman, we settled into a rhythm, balancing classes and our new reality. But the tension from that night in the bar lingered, a reminder that not everyone would accept us. I started noticing the looks, some curious, some hostile, and it made me question everything. Was I ready for this? Was Ethan? One night, we were studying in the library when a guy from Ethan's class approached us. "Hey, Ethan," he said, his tone too casual. "Didn't know you were. You know." He gestured vaguely at me, his smirk cutting. Ethan didn't flinch. "Yeah, I am," he said, his voice steady. "Got a problem with that?" The guy backed off, mumbling something, but the encounter left me shaken. Ethan noticed, pulling me aside after. "Don't let them get to you," he said, his eyes fierce. "They don't matter." But they did. Not because I cared about their opinions, but because they reminded me of the world I'd grown up in, the one I'd tried to leave behind. I wanted to be as fearless as Ethan, but part of me was still that scared kid, pretending to be someone he wasn't. The holidays were approaching, and with them, the inevitable trip home. Ethan decided to come with me to Seattle, not to meet my parents, not yet, but to be nearby. A quiet support. We booked a cheap motel near my hometown, a place where we could be together without the weight of expectations. The drive was long, the roads slick with rain, but Ethan kept me laughing with stories about his childhood, his voice a steady anchor. When we reached the motel, we collapsed onto the bed, exhausted but happy, our hands finding each other in the dark. "We're going to be okay," he whispered, and I wanted to believe him. The next day, I went to see my parents alone. The house smelled like it always had coffee and cinnamon, and my mom hugged me tight, her smile warm but searching. "You seem different," she said, and I wondered if she could see the truth written on my face. Dinner was quiet. My dad asking about classes, my mom talking about the neighbors. I kept waiting for the right moment to tell them about Ethan, but it never came. By the time I left, I felt like a coward, the weight of my silence heavier than ever. Back at the motel, Ethan was waiting, his eyes soft with understanding. "You don't have to rush this," he said, pulling me into his arms. "You'll know when you're ready." But I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. The thought of losing my family, of seeing disappointment in their eyes, was a fear I couldn't shake. Ethan was patient, but I could see the hurt in his eyes when I pulled away, when I let fear win. When we got back to campus, things felt different. The holidays had exposed a crack in our foundation, a reminder that love wasn't enough to erase the world's sharp edges. We still laughed, still kissed, still fell asleep tangled together, but I could feel the weight of what was coming. One night, I woke to find Ethan sitting at his desk, staring at his laptop. "Can't sleep?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. He turned, his face shadowed. I want this to work, Noah. But I need to know you're in it, too." His words hit like a punch. I wanted to tell him I was, that I loved him, but the fear was still there, a wall I couldn't climb. "I'm trying," I said, and it was the truth, but it wasn't enough. The next day, I went back to Dr. Ellis, spilling everything me fear, my love, my indecision. She listened, then asked, "What's the cost of staying silent? Not just for Ethan, but for you?" Her question haunted me. I thought about the boy I'd been, hiding in the shadows, and the man I wanted to be, standing in the light with Ethan by my side. I knew what I had to do, but knowing and doing were two different things. That night, I found Ethan on the roof of our dorm, a place we'd gone to stargaze when the world felt too heavy. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice breaking. "But I love you, and I don't want to lose you." He turned to me, his eyes bright with tears. "I love you too," he said, and then he kissed me, fierce and desperate, like he was trying to hold on to us both. Spring came to Whitman, the campus blooming with color and possibility. Ethan and I were still together, navigating the messy, beautiful reality of being us. We weren't perfect, there were still fights. Still moments when fear crept in, but we were honest. And that made all the difference. I finally told my parents. Over a shaky video call that left me trembling. My mom cried. My dad was quiet. But they didn't turn away. "We love you," my mom said, her voice thick with emotion. "We just need time." It wasn't everything I'd hoped for, but it was a start. And Ethan was there, holding my hand when I hung up. We faced the campus together, too. There were still whispers, still looks, but Ethan's strength was contagious. When someone made a snide comment, he'd laugh it off, his arm around my shoulders, and I learned to stand taller, to let myself be seen. One evening, we went back to the open mic night, this time as a couple. We performed another duet, our voices blending in a way that felt like a promise. The crowd cheered, and Sarah was there, grinning from the front row, her pride a quiet gift. As we walked home, hand in hand, I thought about that night months ago, when Ethan's touch had changed everything. I'd been afraid then, pretending to sleep to avoid the truth. But now, I was awake fully, gloriously awake, and I wouldn't go back. Our story wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, still moments when the world would test us. But we had each other, and that was enough. In the quiet of our dorm, with the moonlight spilling through the window, I looked at Ethan and knew this was what it meant to be brave, to love without pretense, to live a truth I'd once thought impossible. And as we lay together, his hand in mine, I realized that the greatest act of courage wasn't in the saying or the doing, but in the choosing to love, to be seen, to stay awake.